Lori, do you want to start a little intro yourself?
Sure. Well, it's very nice to be here. I appreciate the invitation. I see some familiar faces, although not too many. So thank you. And like Isaac, I realize we're the last thing between you guys before y'all can go out and have some fun or go home. So we really, we're very low tech. No PowerPoint. No, I don't have any handouts. We're just going to really talk about how the rubber hits the road, and what you need from your organization to take off with your commitment to ETO and evaluation and using data. So I'm very, very happy to be here. Maybe I'll start by telling the story about when the youth center was really not, when we used to count everything by pencil and paper. And I guess our story starts about 10 years ago. And the youth center was very, very multi-service, even at that time. And I'd run into people and they'd say, well, how many kids do you serve? And I'd sort of think a minute and I'd start kind of adding the numbers in my head and thinking, well, about, more or less in this program, and it depends on which day. And, then they'd say, well, how many kids are in more than one program? And I say, well, there's some, and some of the kids live in the houses, and then they go to our schools, or, I don't really know that exact number, and I could probably figure it out. So, it was clear to me that we were not able to answer the most basic questions about who we serve, and who walks through the doors. So that had been on my mind, that we needed to, get better at this. Meanwhile, we were getting different city contracts and foundation contracts and federal ones, and they all required some kind of database. And the staff would have to put in information. And it would be very different information, but we had to do it. We didn't have a choice. If we were going to take the funding, we had to do it. So I realized we had 8 or 10 of those different databases, but I never saw a report. I never got anything back. I knew we had to do it, but it really was of limited value to us. Then a big foundation was looking at us and trying to decide if they were going to invest in us. And they put us through the ringer. We were talking to them for a year, and I thought we all had that. It was going to be a big pot of money. At the very end, they came to me and said, well, there's 6 deal breakers here, and you've met 5 of the requirements, but you haven't met 1. And I just don't see that you're an organization that's committed to really doing evaluation. And I thought, well, yeah, that's what we wanted you to help us pay for, and we're committed, but we don't really have the infrastructure to do it. But anyway, we did not get the investment, and I was really mad. I just thought, this is nuts. They wasted a year of our time. We were in multiple conversations with them. Here, right at the end, they come, and that was the deal breaker. So in the back of my mind, I was always thinking, boy, we're going to figure out how to get this investment. And partly because I was just mad, but also because I knew that train was leaving the station around using data to improve outcomes, and that we really needed to be on that train in some kind of way.
How long ago was that one?
That was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. The last piece of the story was I met the original, the one and only, the founders of ETOlution at a conference in San Diego about 10 years ago. And we were chit-chatting, and they were talking about this. It might have been longer, I lose track of the time, but they were talking about this new product that they had developed out of workforce development in Baltimore, and I went to a demonstration of this ETO package software, and I thought, wow, that looks really neat. These are people who had done youth development work, they had done youth job training, they were really smart technologically. Boy, maybe we should buy this product. So I go back to the youth center and we buy the product, and I'm all excited about ETO, but I realized nobody at the youth center knew how to operationalize it. So there were these series of incidents that sort of led up to our understanding that we really needed to take a much deeper look at how to gather the most basic demographic information at the center, and then go much deeper than that to really figure out how we could take data, use a software package, figure out what we wanted to measure, which was really the hard part, and then bring it to life. And that was our journey to using data to get better results, and in this particular instance, our commitment to using the ETO, the Efforts to Outcome software. So it was a number of sort of things that happened along the way. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll let Isaac ask another question, was I knew at that time that if we did it, it had to be meaningful to us, and to the organization, and to the staff, and to the young people. And that if we did it just sort of superficially, to sort of satisfy some external funder, it just wasn't going to take off. It wasn't going to mean what we really needed it to mean at that time in the life of the organization, and even more importantly now. So let me kind of stop there and see what questions Isaac or any of you might have.
So you as executive director, Laura, you had this vision, but kind of I'd like to hear about, since I wasn't there, what you had to do in terms of selling it to the rest of the senior team at LAYC, and then particularly the board of directors, and what were those conversations like?
Well, I have to say at the very beginning, it was a bit of a leap of faith, because I wasn't quite sure where the commitment to using data or measurement or evaluation was going to take us. But I knew that I had to start thinking about that as importantly as we think about our IT office or our HR office or our business office. That this had to be kind of fully fused into the fabric of the organization in a meaningful way. So what happened was we were very, very fortunate. We had the opportunity to do a strategic plan. And this was coming right off the heels of the rejection of this other big foundation that had walked away from us. So the issue of evaluation was in the back of my mind, or actually in the front of my mind. And what a lot of people were saying to us, and for those of you that work in multi-service organizations work, you do so many things, but what are you really good at? What do you really do? You know, because it's a little harder sometimes to grasp multiplicity and connectivity of work around a young person's life. It's a little easier to sort of grasp this kid made this score on this test score, and if they hadn't been in my tutoring program, they would have flunked. You know, where the measurement is a little more easy. You know, they got the GED or they didn't. They graduated to 8th grade or they didn't. You know, there's these discrete measures that you can count. In our case, it was a little harder, and people kept saying, what are you really good at? And why are you doing so much? Why don't you drop some of these things that you're not really that good at? And I would say to them, well, how do you know we're not good at it? You know, what's the criteria for making that decision about what we should continue or what we shouldn't continue, unless the criteria is simply, do we have money for it? You know, if you don't have the money, you cut the program, but it could be one of your best programs. So my reaction was, until we really have a quality system here that can lead us to that information, I wouldn't know how to tell you. I can tell you what my hunches are about what we're really good at, but I can't really tell it to you beyond a qualitative way. So when we did this strategic plan, we decided to really start to unravel what it meant at the youth center to use evaluation and learn. Well, let me frame, what we wanted to do was become a learning organization. And Isaac's title is Learning and Evaluation. So the learning was really the key passion that I think we were feeling at that time. And we also wanted it to lead us to some answers, to really being able to figure out what we were doing well, what we could do better, how we could learn from each other within the organization. Anne's smiling, look at this, and she was at the youth center. It's not always an exact science, but anyway, that was kind of the framework for what we were looking for. We were really, really very fortunate because we were able to do the strategic plan, we were able to think through it, And then I got the funder to pay when they invested in our plan for our first and only, and it's so great we've had a first and only, because I think that's a big issue too. You really need to find the right person. Our first and only director of learning and evaluation. And that's, had we not had that commitment of that first piece of money, it would have been very difficult to begin that journey. And it really has been sort of a leap of faith journey down this path. You need to have somebody who's going to pay for it, and they need to understand that it's a critical piece of the capacity of an organization, equally as important as IT or HR, or some of the other things we traditionally think of as our back office capacity.
The board, did the board have any pushback with this, or were the board onto your vision?
Yeah, the board had participated in the strategic planning process. So the board, we were very, some of you may remember at that time, that's when a lot of the foundations were talking about outcomes and evaluation, and they were all talking about if you can't prove your outcomes, we're not going to fund you. And this was even before the economy got so bad, before we really wanted to look, people were starting to throw around words like return on investment and, double bottom line and social indicators and cost comparisons of a young person in jail versus a young person getting their GED and going to college, and all of this stuff was running through our minds. So the board has been a very vibrant part of the strategic planning process. And I think from the outset, the integration in the conversation about the importance of learning and using data and looking at measurement was very much a part of the conversation. And in that strategic plan, I'm trying to remember, that was when the hard part first was sharpening what did we really want to measure. What were we going to stand behind and say, these are the outcomes that we want to stand behind. This is what we're going to measure, so that when Isaac came on board and he helped us do this, and then we brought a team on board, they had a framework from which to move forward and really look at how we were going to integrate this and fuse this through the fabric of the organization.
Expand on that a little bit, Lori. So talk about, you have the vision, there's a strategic plan. Right before I'm hired, even after I'm hired, how do you push your vision down to the rest of the organization and make sure it filters through?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, it was really important to the youth center and to me from the outset that this data thing and using ETO was not about necessarily, it was not hinging on performance evaluation. We weren't using it to say, you're doing a good job, you get to stay here, you're doing a bad job, you're out. That's not what it was. So it was never articulated inside the youth center as a way to sort of determine who were high-performing staff or lower-performing staff. It was very much articulated as a way to become a learning organization and to use data to really look at what we were good at, what we could get better at, what we could share among the organization, what we could learn from. So that was really important out the gate, that the organization never saw it as sort of a punitive kind of performance evaluation tool. Now, only today, I'd say, are we getting to the point where, we've really built into everyone's job description, you have to use ETO. I'm asking Isaac and the team, who are the staff that are sort of consistently not using it? We need to deal with that. But really the beauty of it is when Isaac and Tony and Dan, the team sits down with the staff and they talk about relative to their program, this is what we want to measure. And then it's really a dialogue. It's an interactive kind of process that leads to what eventually gets put into the ETO information. And I would think, and I'm not in a lot of those meetings, but I hear about them often, that there's challenging and they're hard and that there's pushback and what are we going to look at, what are we not. But that's really the beauty, I think, of what it's brought to the youth center. Isaac referred, I think in his speech the other day, about the young person who went into the court and showed him an ETO report and one of the kids living in our residentials, they could take the judge and say, hey, this is, you know, what I knew when I came in, and this is what I learned, and this is what I still have to learn. You know, I was almost crying when I heard about that, because I thought, wow, you know, if this can filter down to the level of the young people and the judges and the probation officers, this whole thing has been totally worth it. And if staff can share information about each other and learn from each other, this whole thing has been totally worth it. So I can't remember what the question was, but I think it was about getting the buy-in from the staff. And I think that for me, it's like anything. If it's not meaningful, if it's not worth your time, people are gonna see it as a chore and blow it off, and it's gonna be superficial, and what you're gonna get back is superficial. But if it means something to you, the young people, the program, the organization, the quality of what we stand for, then, you know, you all have a lot of pride in it, and you want to do it. Not every single day, every single minute, but in terms of the big picture, it's something that the Youth Center now, today, I think is very proud of.
I want to bring it to a little bit more of a, I think, come from the abstract to a little bit more concrete now, and talk about, particularly nowadays, something that's very important, which is budgeting and how to pay for this. I think, in my opinion, the Youth Center was very much a project of a great point in time where we had a funder that was willing to pay for my position initially. But my team here, my fantastic team of 3 other individuals sits in front of us, you know, it took a while to build up to that point. Can you talk about that and kind of what was going through your mind when I came to you one day and said, I need at least one more person, and then what you as an ED were thinking about paying for it and how that has shaped the journey over time?
Yeah, you know, I think it's really tough. I think that we have to, and I'm sure all of y'all are doing this, and all of your EDs that you work with are doing the same thing I did. And I think it's probably a little easier now because the philanthropic conversation has changed, and there's a lot of emphasis around evaluation and evidence-based, you know, data, models, and all the Social Innovation Fund and all that stuff. You know, the whole Obama administration has embraced this evidence-based replication and scale. So there's a little more conversation about it now. But I think, you know, we were really fortunate at the beginning that we had a funder pay for the position. But what was so great about it was, as it was becoming alive in the center, it was clear to me that one full-time person really couldn't manage this in the way, you know, that the youth center was trying to do so. So we've just now built this into our overhead. It's part of our G&A, and so it does kick your G&A up a little bit, you know, but it's a very, so when I look at our whole sort of capacity infrastructure, IT, HR, valuation, and development are sort of the main 4 capacity areas that the organization needs to function. And so we've built it up. We had 5 full-time people. We're now at 4 full-time people. We're trying to hold on to that. You know, the more depth you go into with this work, the more you can utilize your people. And we're really getting at the point where we want to publish, and we have so much great data. We are doing an external evaluation of an evidence-based pathway. So we've got a lot going on. But we just had to make a big commitment to do this, and it's tough. But you know, it's always a choice about how you spend your money. And if you're committed to it, you just have to do it and build it into your overhead and try to raise the money and always be championing the need for it in the context of the conversations. The payoff has been extraordinary. I mean, we would have never made it to the Social Innovation Fund. I'm sure I don't know if y'all know, anyways, it's an Obama thing. We would have never made it to the Social Innovation Fund if we had not had this in place. You know, the payoff programmatically in terms of funding, particularly in philanthropy, you know, with government, quite frankly, sometimes outcomes just don't matter. You know, and so I've had to kind of swallow that sometimes you lose something totally on merit, on politics that has nothing to do about merit. But, you know, that's just the world, that's just what it is. But to us, it means something. To the young people, it means something. To the staff, it means something. So it's tough to pay for sometimes, you know, but we've just integrated it into our bottom line, and we're trying to hold steady and keep moving forward with it. But if you try to get a foundation maybe to kick you off, you know, go to one of your funders that loves you anyway, and talk to them about this. If they have a management assistance program or a capacity building fund, mostly what we think of when we go to those is not evaluation. We think about fundraising or development, but it's so tied with fundraising, honestly. The data that we can now generate that goes into our funding proposals is extraordinary. So I think you have to go to a funder who loves you and believes in you and gets it, that this is the time that, you know, a lot of organizations are going to be shutting down, whether we like it or not. And you'll be ahead of the pack if you can show your data and present it to people and show the quality of what you're doing.
Jen?
So, how were you convinced to pursue that? Because I've been saying for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years that I really need some administrative support 4 days a week, and I've been told things like, well, not until you're full-time are we going to put any money towards administrative support, and I said it makes a lot more sense to hire somebody 2 days a week to fix data entry errors and merge duplicates than it does to pay me to do that, and then I work on other kinds of things like helping development, proposal writing, analyzing data. And then I was like, yes, it's really important, but, you know, that's not going to happen this or next fiscal year. Or I had a, capacity building grant. Well, yeah, we're going to apply for that, but for other things. And it's been really challenging because organizations see that as important, but I think they feel like, I don't know, it must be like, it's kind of enough, but it's not always.
Well, I guess it depends on what the motivation is, you know. I don't know your organization. Maybe, you know, there's really an external audience and then there's the internal work. And the maybe your external funders are going to give you money with or without that information, you know, without the commitment to a deeper commitment to the outcomes or the learning or whatever you call it internally. And so if so, your ED might just not see it as a priority. You know, I think it's a little short-sighted, but I don't know. You know, I know what it's done for us. I gotta tell you, it was a huge leap of faith out the gate. You know, a huge leap of faith. Like, everyone kept talking about it, but I didn't really get it. I didn't exactly know what it meant until we kind of jumped in and started, you know, doing the work and figuring it out. But I think the argument I would use is, you know, if it's us or some other group and we're, you know, these funders equally are trying to decide between us and someone else, showing our outcomes could be what gets us the money. You know, I just don't know because I don't know your funding environment.
I think they feel like it's kind of enough that I can do that, not for there to be.
Well, really,
not to, you know, the vision is like to grow local, do that sometime in the future. So maybe it would help to ask, like, once it was more than just Isaac and hire other, like the next person, what did that then enable LAYC to do?
Well, Isaac's probably better at answering that than me because I just remember him sort of saying, Lori, we need more. I don't remember so much about how he was distributing all the work. We're multi-site, we're over 200 people. I don't remember how we got to 5.
I can be very persuasive. I think it's an important question, and part of this, I think, and I understand the frustration in your organizations and prioritization, and oftentimes having this conversation with your EDs, but in a very real sense, and this is true in the for-profit world as well, you have to understand what makes your supervisor or your direct report tick and what motivates them. And you have to do a lot of upward management. So in our interactions, I figure out, well, what motivates Lori? How can I frame a message in a way that Lori will really get and to communicate in what in my mind is a clear message that we could be doing so much more if I had more staff, and framing it in a way that's saying, hey, Lori, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this, this, and this? We generate this kind of report that is directed at this particular funding group, which we've never been able to get to, which has turned us down in the past. if you give me another person, we can get much closer to that, and it makes it far more likely to get money in the door. And that was how I got my first person in. Then my second person, it's a different story. I go to Lori and I say, all right, well, we've got new funding in the door. We have a focus on kind of the philanthropy and the foundation world. Now we need to really step up our game with our programmatic services. We need to really identify what we do well and what we are not doing so well. And I joked in the keynote yesterday, and those of you who've seen the film, the Saving Philanthropy film, where I tell the domestic violence story, that in and of itself is a big motivator, right? Because now I have a concrete example. I can text to Lori, and I know Lori, and I say, this is a heartstring tug example, and I can go to her and I say, if you want to prevent us from harming more kids, you're going to give me another person. It worked. And it's figuring out how to communicate that to your executive director, to your board of directors, and laying out, this is what we're going to be able to get. And if you don't, well, we're going to be left in a moment where we're only being able to measure these types of things. And it's even more true today than when I said it to Lori in the past. Other organizations are going to catch up to us. And when they do, they're going to take money away from us. And we're not going to be able to serve kids anymore. And I think that is a very motivational factor for any ED. You're not going to be able to serve your client base anymore because you're not going to be able to prove that you deserve this money more than the next organization. And this was back when the economy was good. It's even more necessary in today's environment.
Another thing too is, and I think Isaac's right. It was like always the next thing, but it really depends on how deep you want to go in the organization. If all I really wanted was that basic demographic stuff, so that I didn't have, so that now when you ask me how many kids did we serve last year, I can say 4,322 and this age is this, that's all I wanted.
4245.
Right, that's
She's
all.
close though.
I was close. That's all that I had wanted. We probably would have stopped there. But that was just sort of basic demographic information. What I really wanted was it to be meaningful to the staff who are doing the work so that they can get better and better and better at what they do. And that's a much deeper usage, and there's no way one person could have done it inside the organization. I know the team gets frustrated sometimes because the staff are at different levels of commitment, they're at different levels of education, they're at different levels of understanding the value of using it. But man, I'm just going to keep tooting that horn because it's really not about them. It's really about the quality. Well, actually, in some cases, it really is about them because we hire a lot of young people who grew up at the youth center. Well, it's about everyone. And I mean, people leave the youth center and they're marketable. They can show what they've done at the youth center with ETO and that we're a high-performing organization, and that means a lot to the staff. But it also, for me, boils down to with the resources we have, I want to make sure that we're doing the best work for young people that we can, and that we learn from that. Because in the end, that's what we really stand for. And so you either make the commitment and you jump in and you do it, or you decide, it's really okay just to have the demographic information, but we're not going to teach every single person on the staff how to use it. With our AmeriCorps, we have even more. They're all using it. And I guess it would be helpful for me to hear right now, even again, why is this kicking us up a notch? What is this doing for us? What does it really mean to the staff? But that should be the compelling thing for the ED, in terms of, and the board, in terms of juggling the resources. And I'm really, I go into meeting after meeting after meeting, and I'm saying I'm trying not to cut development, I'm trying not to cut evaluation, I'm trying not to cut, we don't really have much HR left. We've cut that. But, you just have to make your priorities, and if you jump in and do it with the quality that you want to do it and not halfway. So that would be some of what, I would be wondering about regarding, the decision-making process that your ED might be thinking.
You've seen that you just said you cut HR, so is that a direct result of making the employees more content? You don't have the turnover.
No, I think the employees wish we had a more hefty HR department, but they can say for themselves. But I think partly we cut HR because we've had really bad luck with finding good HR directors, so we're going to try to sub it out. So there was no relationship at all. But we're complicated, and I don't know, we just weren't finding the right people. And so we're trying to streamline it now by subbing it out, and we'll see how that goes.
But you have seen as a result of this more content employees, less turnover.
Well, what I have seen is I've heard people say to me that the commitment that we have to using data and learning has made this an attractive place to want to work. You know, that's a value add. I think, Ann, you might have even said that in your interview.
I've actually had 2 staff now come and tell me they would have quit if it wasn't for the evaluation process because their relationship with their direct supervisor was so strained and they didn't have a forum for voicing their opinions and telling their supervisor what they thought was going wrong with the program. But through the whole focus group process, through reviewing assessment results, reviewing attendance data, they've just created that open space for them to talk more. So, in that
That may
sense,
also
yes,
speak
people are
that we
talking.
need more HR, but that's a whole other conversation. But I
Like a
appreciate.
conflict resolution
Yeah.
way, just as yes, your opinion matters. We need to all think critically about this. Don't make emotional decisions, make data-based decisions.
I think it's also important to keep in mind that the story you're hearing now is 6.5 years in. I've been in the position 6.5 years, and you've heard from multiple people earlier this morning that this is a journey. This is a multi-year journey. And keep that in mind, that you're talking about making organizational change, which is hard in and of itself, but doing it in a way that is in an area that tends to freak out most nonprofit staff, right? Most people don't come into the nonprofit world to work with data and to do evaluation outcomes measurement. So you have a really tough task in front of you, and you need to be realistic as to what you can achieve during any particular time period. I mean, I think that I've been lucky. I've had a lot of support. We've had a lot of breaks go our way, and we still have a lot of work to do ahead of us, even after 6.5 years. But I think that any organization, any nonprofit that really commits to this can really see a good return on their investment after even 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I did. So, and maybe your last line about return on investment. I understand that you feel confident that you can collect more data, it's more accurate, that you can demonstrate outcomes, that you are demonstrating that you're reaching the outcomes that you intend to. How much do you think it's improved the quality of your service? Like, do you think you're making more change now than you were before, more efficient change? Are the people you work with further ahead? Because it seems to be the discussion's on 2 levels. Here, one, we've got this technology, we've got technology in the broadest sense of being able to capture data effectively, identify our outcomes, move to our outcomes, but do you understand my question?
Yeah, you know, there's always going to be external factors that impact your outcomes. For example, we have had some federal WIA job training money. You know, and a guy gets elected, he puts us on month to month, the new mayor comes, they change the head of the city's employment thing, we go on month to month. When you're on month to month, if you lose a staff person, you're nervous about hiring. Then a new mayor comes, changes that person, we reapply, she shuts us all down, it was a mess. So our outcomes have not been what they could have been, given the reality of how we've had to manage that money. So there's always going to be external factors where you're not getting the outcomes that you want. But I think the real improvement takes place in the way that Ann just articulated, where staff can really dig deep into the data and look at the outcomes in their specific program area against what we stated we would do and figure out, are we hitting them, are we not, if not, why? And what I always say is, if it's an internal issue that we can control and manage, we gotta go for it. You know, we're gonna hang in there and figure it out. When it's external, sometimes you just have to say, you know, the city is like so wasting their money in the way that they're managing this grant.
I think I can say definitively that we provide, LAYC provides better services now than it did 6 years ago. Absolutely. Even given all these external factors that have gone on and all these changes that are outside of our control, the services we offer now are better than they were 6 years ago. What's interesting about that is that even in that example that Lori is talking about, where the best outcomes for that particular program she's referencing were happening in 2008 and 2009, and then all of this crazy political stuff happened and really hurt the outcomes for that program, we were still able to use old, in my opinion, 2008, 2009 outcomes to get that program refunded and turned into a charter school in the District of Columbia. Right? So even despite all of that, going into 2012 and 2013, we're going to still be able to provide those services and probably better than they were initially provided for, based primarily on the fact that we had generated 3 or 4 years worth of really good outcome data. So there's a certain measure of protection there that even when crazy political stuff happens, which is what always will, and you are able to measure and capture good outcome data, once that stuff settles down or once an opportunity presents itself, you can then capitalize on that opportunity.
Yeah, the other really neat stuff we can do now is, let's say in our GED program, we can calculate our pass rate. And we know that our pass rate was
It's like 84 this past year. It used to be 90.
84% of the kids that we send to take the GED pass. The national pass rate is like 70-something, and the city's pass rate was 50-something. And then when you section out, well, how many Latinos in the District of Columbia got their GED, we knew that 1 out of 5 came from us, and then how many youth between 16 and 24 got it. We, African American and Latino, we knew how many were coming through us. And, we never could have been able to do that. And that's impressive when you're beating the city average by, 35%. And then, when we applied, which we just did for a GED grant, I don't know if we'll get it, but we just applied, we use that data in all of our applications. So there's a real connection now between the development office and the evaluation office when we write proposals for funding. So I'm so happy when I hear that stuff. When I get our foster care ratings back and I see you center 100%. Now some of that is the foster care system, but it's also because of ETO and the conversations and what we're measuring. So I agree with Isaac that we are getting better outcomes. And we also have a stronger staff. I think our staff is getting better at what they do.
And again, part of the story of that on the journey is we lost some staff along the way. Some staff that really weren't on board for this, that really were hesitant or resistance to it. And oftentimes they self-selected and moved to another organization, but we were able to backfill them and get new people who right from the beginning, day one, when they get the new employee orientation, Lori gives the background and I give the importance of outcomes and data collection for the entire organization, and they know exactly the culture that they are walking into from day one. But we lost people, and it happens.
There's also, and I've been around the nonprofit world for a while, I've been at the Youth Center for a long time, there's also this sort of backstory that you hear of, well, nonprofits, they're charity, and their volunteerism, and it's almost like excuses for why you're not doing really good work. And I think, we have to in my mind, that's just, we have to be better actually, because there's no profit. Well, anyway, and in our case, young people, we work with middle school and teenagers and parents. They don't like what's going on at the youth center. Nobody makes them come. It's not like a little kid that you drop off and you pick up. Our young people are going to come to the youth center because they feel like they're getting something out of it.
Our kids don't even go to school. They're not going to come to a program if they don't think.
Yeah, and we're re-engaging kids that have dropped out, and we have waiting lists. So I think there's a direct correlation with the quality of the work. What other questions? Let's see if I can.
I know everyone's tired. There were a lot of questions this morning.
So, sorry.
Go ahead.
What's your structure, just your organizational structure? It sounds like you're serving about 4,000.
About 4,400 right now a year. Isaac, the evaluation is, Isaac's position is on the senior team, so it's senior leadership at the youth center.
And I sit at the same level as our Director of Development and our Chief Financial Officer.
So you're
I'm the ED.
Executive director, you're the senior.
I was senior
leadership
team.
And you have multiple sites, so you're an enterprise ETO. The sites are all in the same city?
No.
No.
Region. We're in
In
suburban
two
Maryland.
counties in Maryland and the District of Columbia.
Okay, so you have site managers or something like that?
You're looking at
I'm
the
sorry,
three site
no.
managers right
I
here.
didn't mean
but-
an ETO site
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
manager.
Yeah,
Yes.
Isaac has it all coordinated.
Yeah.
They're all assigned certain.
But you're right, we have directors for each of the Maryland locations in addition to the DC.
So, when you're talking about that sort of paradigm shift that it takes for the whole office to suddenly, get on board with this and how, sometimes there's people that basically say, this is the culture that I, was interested in when I first took this job. This is something that I think about. Sometimes people might be on board, but they might lack the technical skills to really sort of wrap their heads around this stuff. And so there's sort of a technical learning curve, especially if there's like generational gaps in
Yep.
organizations and things like that. And I can't think of any organization that probably doesn't have that issue. I mean,
They're doing a lot of training,
Yeah.
and they do, and that, and Isaac did come to me a few weeks, multiple times, and say there's just, some people aren't, they're not getting with the program, and I said, was it a technical issue, or is it a capacity issue? I need to know who they are, we need to talk about this.
We understand, I think, and part of what I teach my team is that everyone is going to come to the table with different technical skills, right? We've dealt with everyone from people, and this is true, people who didn't even know what double clicking a mouse was, all the way to people that had really sophisticated experience using Excel or using other databases other than ETO and everything in between. Our mission is to, no matter someone's technical level, to get them trained and up to speed in ETO. Even if they don't know even if they're not computer literate, even if they have some sort of adult learning disabilities that we kind of discover along the way. What we struggle with then, and this is what I bring to Lori oftentimes, is people that are simply not motivated to learn. Because I think that's a huge difference than just lacking the technical skill.
What percentage of the staff do you think would fall under that category?
Lacking the motivation nowadays, less than 1%.
It's shrinking.
Less than 1%.
and you're talking about the motivation to learn versus like the
Right,
motivation.
right. Someone who immediately puts up a wall and says, this is data, I'm not going to do it, this is not what I meant to do as a nonprofit professional, and I'm not even going to bother listening. Versus someone who says, I don't even know what you mean when you say double click, can you please teach me that?
But there's not, you'd be surprised, there's no preconceived notion about who's gonna get with the program and who's not, because we can have somebody, who barely speaks English. And, but it's just the highest, most proficient user because they're so committed to it and they see what it does for them. So, there's not, do you agree with that? I
Yeah,
mean,
some of our best users are some of the ones that have been around the youth center the longest and who were in the organization way before Lori was even thinking of doing evaluation stuff. And their commitment to the youth and the commitment to the work has really changed their minds and motivated them to kind of take this journey. Then we have others who are just kind of, for one reason or another, just extremely resistant to it. And those, quite honestly, are the people we try to push out the door.
Yeah, and I don't know about you guys, but right now in this environment, I just am not interested in carrying people who don't care about really doing good work. There's too many great people out there looking for work, and the staff we have has to be the staff who really want to be there helping young people. Otherwise, it's just not the right organization for them at this time.
And then Jeff.
I just wanted to expand on that. So we offer weekly ETO trainings in their group level. We have, right now, 4 different levels for them to learn how to enter data. Starts basic, goes into editing their efforts, reviewing participant efforts, all the way up to learning pivot tables and analyzing your own data, which we have a group, probably about 10 staff who know how to do pretty proficiently now. But for staff, we've got one staff person's deaf, 2 staff people are blind. A lot of staff people come to me and say, oh, I have a learning disability. Can you give me one-on-one training? So we do one-on-one training a lot as needed. People are always coming up to our office. So that's helped a lot. And people are pretty honest when they need more feedback.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you have had some HR related issues and you were going to outsource that. But it sounds like you guys are probably pretty good at recruiting and in that recruiting process, picking out the right kind of people that are really focused on helping kids and that are amenable to using data in order to continuously learn. Am I making an assumption, or is that?
No, do you have a question or?
Well, I guess what I'm looking for is, am I right? Are you guys really good at recruiting?
Yeah, I think we are. I think with the HR, and this is the challenge there, and really HR falls in two categories. There's those basic things like benefits and days off and COBRA and sort of but then there's the talent management. You know, and creating learning opportunities for your staff, even beyond ETO. And, you know, and honestly, if you are putting, I mean, there are some trade-offs. If you're putting a lot of money into evaluation, maybe it would have been nice to have a two-person HR office, one dealing with, you know, talent management and one dealing with just the basics. We don't have the money for that right now, you know, so what we're doing is sort of trying to sub out the more basic stuff and then the talent management, try to fuse it through the fabric of the organization, and ETO is a big part of that, and the training that we're doing. You know, that's the learning, that's the more interesting stuff. What makes managers and directors crazy is when you don't have your sick leave calculated right, or someone leaves and the COBRA thing didn't work out. You know, and that creates a lot of dissatisfaction as well. But we really, honestly, and I guess in response to the questions over here, I've made some choices regarding the resources that we do have and where we're going to put it and what it means to the organization. But yes, I think we've gotten much, much better about being able to eye people who want to come in and be a part of our culture. And you know, I don't know about you guys, but a lot of our workforce is young. And they will ask me, well, I don't interview that many people on but I know others who do. They will ask questions about what is your culture here? You know, what is this trajectory for this or that? And what is the learnings that I can have? You know, it's real different than when I started. And I was just like lucky to have a volunteer job. You know, it's changed a lot. So I think that you are trying to create an environment that makes you attractive to, you know, the employees that are going to be with us. And a lot of young people, I guess the majority of our staff is maybe 25 to 35. Some of them, they're going to be with us 2, 3, 4 years, and they're going to decide to go to the Peace Corps, or they're returning, or they're going to go get their master's degree. There's always going to be that curve of people who are going to be here a while and then start off on their next journey. But while they're with us, we want them to be very high performing, and when they go, we want to attract people who will say, hey, I've heard about what you're doing with ETO and your commitment to using data, and I want to be a part of your organization.
So just one follow-up. So I know that you guys do some very specific things in order to create this culture that you've developed. Can you talk a little bit about some of those specific things that you do?
You mean in the evaluation or just in general?
Getting people to appreciate and to use ETO. Specifically, data collection.
Yeah.
I mean, some of
a lot of it, there's several parts of that. I mean, I think the first thing, and I'm thinking particularly early on, because I think that's one of the most difficult, a lot of it was very much messaging. So it was coming up with consistent messages and delivering it, you know, the entire time, that, you know, this is no longer something that is optional anymore, that you are required to collect this information. And you heard, I think the congressional people say it this morning, if it's not an ETO, it didn't happen. And coming up with very consistent messages and then holding people accountable to those. So there are several conversations that I had 6 years ago and continue to have today with supervisors and direct staff, where I'll run a report and see like, well, it doesn't look like you did anything this past year, because I really only have 15 logins for you in ETO, and you only have a record of providing 5 hours of service. Let's talk about that. And really kind of being that detailed and having that discussion and holding people accountable to it, I think really is a big part of the culture. And then having the managers also have that discussion as well, because, you know, myself and my team, we can't fire anyone. You know, ultimately, we're not the ones that can make the decision to let someone go. But I sure as heck can go to a manager or a lawyer or someone else and say, here's what's been happening with this person in ETO. And forget even the results they're getting with their kids, they're not even logging on. Now you tell me if that's the kind of person you want within the culture of the organization. Now, that's the stick part of it. the carrot and the former positive part of it is, again, you heard Progressive talk about this, they stole the idea from us. ETO Users of the Month, where you reward people who are good users of the organization publicly and with some sort of monetary compensation that's small but still appreciated and fun, right? And it becomes a competition, particularly early on. It was a motivating tool for the entire staff to be like, hey, we want to be the next ETO User of the Month. And it got to the point now where people are putting it on their resume, right? People put it on their resume and used it in the past. I know of at least one person that was hired by another ETO using customer, another customer. They hired them because they had on their resume LAYC ETO User of the Month. You know, as much as that upsets me, I think it's also very interesting.
Well, you don't want the staff nobody else wants.
Right. Yeah.
You had a question?
Oh, we have one over here first in the middle.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's okay. It was kind of piggybacking off Jeff's question
okay.
about, I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about the staff training, how many staff you have doing the weekly trainings, and what kind of challenges you have.
So the challenge is that we used to do one-on-one trainings, and we had a team of 5. And then I think it was right before the summer programming started, I realized that the program that I was assigned to, within the next week, along with designing pre and post tests, analyzing the school year data, the school year had just ended, getting ready for end of year reporting, new funds, I had to train something like 13 new staff members in 1 week because their program was starting. And I can't even do 13 one-on-one sessions in a week, like let alone give them the follow-up support that they need. So we started doing group trainings. Now we've done, I think we've had about 30 staff trained in each of the levels. So we've got a good group of staff who have these really solid skills who other people can go to now and look for help because they know they've completed the entire training series.
And it varies very much. So what Ann is talking about is kind of our regular, what we call the ETO 101, 102, 201, 202 trainings, and then there's going to be progressions on top of that. Then we also do kind of what I would tend to call more technical assistance with the staff. So if a staff, whether or not they've gone through the trainings or not with Ann, have needs in terms of using or learning how to use ETO or kind of upping their knowledge, they can come to one of us and we will give them kind of that one-on-one direct support. So we're very much the technical assistance team around ETO internally. Then we also, it depends a lot on the program too. So for some programs we can absolutely train people in a group, or we can do things that are very group training based. Just last week we trained probably close to 70 AmeriCorps members over a 3-day period on how to use ETO for tracking their after-school educational support efforts. But there's some programs that we operate that you have to do one-on-one training. So it's been a process to figure out over time as to what's the appropriate training mix for exactly what you want to try to achieve. And then as part of the training, getting back to Jeff's point, you fuse the whole culture thing as part of that as well. So you're not just training for training purposes or to get people to understand how to use ETO, but you're also training the larger context of the larger picture as to why ETO is important in terms of the performance management aspect of it, and why if you are not very detail oriented with putting in this data at the very beginning, it's going to lead to poor reporting down the road, and why you need to be very detail oriented and do it correctly at the very beginning.
I have asked, and I'll get your questions because we're going to be out of time soon, but I have asked the team now with our program managers to start looking at, are there things that we're measuring that we can lighten up on a bit? You know, can we start pulling out the core and you know, I'm trying to lighten their load a bit so that we can also be publishing some papers and white papers and doing other things. So that's something, you know, we're going to look at strategically over the next 3 months, and there are things we can start backpedaling a bit on that won't sort of impact the results. But anyway, there were a couple hands up. Yeah.
Isaac, I was wondering if you had an evaluation background or OD before you joined this organization?
That's a very interesting question. So actually my undergrad work was in HR, and so I did some OD work, and then I'm professionally trained as an evaluator. That's what I did before coming to LAYC. I worked as a professional evaluator for 7 years before coming to LAYC.
Okay, so you learned some sort of system knowledge even before you got into ETO.
Correct.
Yeah, but it was really important to find someone that was down to earth and could make it fun and user friendly and, you know, not just
And that's what OD
Statistical,
helps.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about the tension between, when you first started out, when you were asked about staff buy-in, you said you were really clear to make sure that when there was a performance, it would be performance-based, and that people's performance was not going to be determined by the information you got from ETO. And yet, when you look at that data, I'm assuming that if you find out that a case manager or somebody isn't clocking the hours or isn't getting the work done, or that it is used.
Well, but that would be one piece of a much bigger scenario. You know, if somebody, now maybe that person's just the most stellar employee and they're just not putting in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's all
But
into
I mean,
the discussion,
I mean,
right?
how do you, that tension between,
Yeah.
this is a learning
Yeah.
environment, we need your candid input,
Yeah.
and yes, you are going to be held accountable for it.
Right, and I do think it is a fine line to walk, and you have to learn what data you need and how to appropriately use the data. And this is true not just for this issue, but also when you're looking in terms of performance management as well. Is you need to figure out what it is that we collect, what does it mean, and how do we interpret it, and then how we're ultimately going to use it. So we've had situations where we've had people that have very few logins and spend very little time in ETO, but they're some of our most efficient ETO users. So some people only need to be in the software for 3 or 4 minutes at a time, and that's perfectly fine as long as they're getting their work done. So it's all this larger context that you have to fold into all of this other discussion about staffing issues and not using it for punitive purposes. So that information, that data is oftentimes used as support when something else is recognized as a problem. So if there are attendance issues or targeted issues with the staff, if there's conflict with a staff person and they're not listening to a supervisor and it's creating issues amongst the team, those situations usually happen, and then the senior management and the middle managers usually come to me and say, what does this person's ETO workload look like, and are they good users of ETO, so that I can factor that in there. If they are strong ETO users, but they have problems with other situations, then the managers can work on those issues. But if there's a pattern of the staff is not doing their work anecdotally, that there's a conflict between the staff and they're creating a bad environment, and their ETO usage is poor, then it just makes the decision to potentially terminate that employee that much easier. But none of this information.
Anybody who's been terminated simply because they didn't log in enough to ETO. There would have to be a lot of other issues going on.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. Hopefully they're quick. The first is, are you guys incorporating your outcome data into ongoing staff evaluations? And the second is, I was interested in the structure of your evaluation department and how you assign responsibilities amongst the members of the team.
I think you can do the second one.
Yeah, you want to start with the first one? Go ahead.
The second one.
Oh, go ahead, because mine is a long answer.
We gotta be quick.
Yeah.
You know what? We gotta get better at that. I want to move in that direction, and I think we're finally at the point where we can start doing that and really incorporating outcome data into staff performance appraisal. We've done it somewhat because, you know, you have grants and contracts and you have built-in outcomes and whether we're meeting those outcomes or not. But I think we can take that to a deeper level now. And I want to figure out, you know, strategically as part of performance how to do that.
So my team, and so I'm the director. I have the titles, 2 learning and evaluation specialists, which are Ann and Tony, who are on the ends here. And then we have Dan, who's the learning and evaluation assistant. So we have 4 people. The way we kind of divide the work is we really kind of look at the full range of the programs that we offer, and we try to chunk it in kind of conceptual areas that seem to make sense so we get some level of expertise. So I kind of have oversight for all of our educational programs because it makes sense to chunk all the education ones in similar outcome and similar staff that I'm working with. Anne is doing a lot of our kind of prevention work and a lot of the substance abuse treatment work, and you're doing like the residential housing stuff too, right?
Mental health.
And mental health counseling. Tony is doing, help me out here, Tony, you're doing some of the workforce and the employment stuff, right? And kind of the GED stuff, because those seem to chunk well together. And Dan supports kind of everyone with doing some of the ETO work that can be done, that needs to be done quickly, but that needs to get done in bulk. So Dan does a lot of our demographic work, regardless of which program that we're working in, and then analyzes some of our pre and post tests that are pretty standardized at this point that cut across all of the content areas. As I've had, this is not my original team, interestingly enough. So the 3 that sit before you today are 3 different people than my original team. I've had a complete staff turnover. So we've kind of moved around program assignments over time depending on interest levels of the staff and capacities, and sometimes we need some professional growth and I need to push my staff and put them in an area that they're completely uncomfortable with so that they can learn how to deal with those types of situations. So it's an ever-evolving process, but that's kind of the way it is right now and how we've developed it over time. I think we only got time for one more question.
Well, I hope this was useful to you all, and that this was what you were hoping to get out of this session in terms of thinking about sort of the rubber hitting the road and the work you're doing back home. You know, I think what's really important too, obviously, is that the evaluation directors and the ED be a good team. And you know that you can really work together and learn from each other. So I guess that's about it, unless there's another question.
Thank you, everyone.